Hello everyone, I am here to talk you through lesson 4 and let you know what you need to be doing this week. Let's take a look at our syllabus, our blackboard, and you see that our lesson objective for this week is to go over the following skills and topic areas. I have added a PowerPoint presentation that you can follow through. I'm going to be going through a reduced version of that PowerPoint, but there's a lot of extra goodies in there. That's because we are going to introduce markup language today, talk about viewing code, and start looking at some of the tools that we can go into to edit and work in our professional careers. We're going to be going through Visual Studio Code. In my particular tutorial, there's no particular reason why you should use Visual Studio Code. I like it. It's kind of standard in the industry, but it gives you a lot of helpful hints that can either assist or impede your learning depending on how much effort you put into it personally. Today, we're going to talk about what goes into HTML code. It is important to remember that this lesson can seem a little overwhelming at first, but it is not required for you to memorize everything right at this moment. We are introducing a lot of things, and then we will memorize those things over the course of the semester through repetition. We will repeat the same code over and over and over again until you're very comfortable with how it works, and this is where it starts. An HTML page is a hypertext markup language. So what does hypertext markup language means? Well, markup language means that we are adding meaning to existing text. We use what we call text. That's the hyper part of the hypertext. When you think of if someone is hyperactive, they are more active, they are overactive. Hypertext is meaning you put over the regular text. So hypertext is interpreted by the browser and it is not shown to the user, but it adds structure and it adds meaning and it adds definition to our website content. In the early days, it's important to remember that this was basically developed out of a government research project trying to worry about what happens if we go to war. But the military doesn't build things all by themselves. They used academics to build the internet, and in the course of building the internet, the academics got used to being able to exchange white papers and research papers back and forth. You can imagine there was a lot of data they needed to pass around while they were building and defining and inventing the internet and its structures and its hardware and its software and everything that needs to happen. They need a lot of coordination. And once you give academics the ability to coordinate, they started realizing that they were just never going to give this up. They looked at this potential that was available, and it's just so much better than faxing things back and forth. It's better than having to go to the library and look things up or have research assistants copying things down. You were able to just mail or connect your academic white papers and list off all the things that you wanted to do. But reading academic white papers, just this wall of text, was horribly painful. I'm sure you can imagine how it was. So they developed a way to start adding structure to build a research paper into what we think of as a research paper. That means it needs headings, it needs paragraphs, it needs lists and tables of data. They developed a way of transmitting that meaning in the text, and they set up the standards for HTML. In the beginning, way back in '89, was the first public version of HTML. It basically had what I mentioned before. It was how you would mark up a document if you wanted it to look like a term paper. You need to be able to link things back and forth and go to other places on the internet and get data. You needed to have headlines and subheadings in your paper. You wanted to define your paragraphs, but it didn't have a lot more than that. It was very basic. A lot of the HTML code, because back then data was expensive, is the single letter stuff. So we have B for bold and A for links because it was a reduced set. So you didn't have to type as much, you didn't have to transmit as much data. As we moved forward, we started developing forms and the ability to interact with HTML. Eventually we got interactive tables, And once tables started coming in, people started realizing the entire website could be treated like a big table. If you wanted to make your data look good, you had one big long row that was the header, and you had a column down the side, and you could put menus and table and information in those cells individually. And by defining a table form for your entire website, you could make it look nice. However, that takes the word table and applies it to text that isn't a table. And that's kind of against what we're trying to do here. We're trying to define meaning for our text. And so we don't want to tag it with the wrong meaning, because then you look at it and you say, well, this should be a table of data, but it's not. We're just using that as a grid, just like on graph paper, to draw out what our website should look like. Once developers started abusing tables, we started trying to solve that problem of having the wrong meaning associated with our data. And we came up with div. Div is this concept that just doesn't mean anything. It's a division of a web page. It's just a piece of a page. You can think of divs as being a blank box on the screen. But it's better than saying it's a table. At least with div, we're saying we don't know what it is. We wanted to, however, make the web accessible for everybody. So we started having to say, well, this is a div and its meaning is a banner. And this is a div and its meaning is the main content of my page. And this is a div and it's supposed to be my footer. And so on and so forth. You ended up having to label every meaningless div so that we could interpret what it actually was. That assists both visually disabled people. It assists machine learning and computers trying to read and interpret your website. You had to explain what the pieces of your website were. And lo and behold, as people did this, we all started basically coming up with the same rough layout for a website. When you picture a commercial website in your head, you picture Amazon with a banner across the top, maybe a menu down the side, and a column of content. And everybody started laying out their websites the same. Because, when I was in school, everybody had these great ideas. We can do anything we want. We don't need to be limited to the forms of paper. But it turns out publishers have been doing this for thousands of years now. We've been laying things out in single pages, and we've been laying things out in posters, and everything you can imagine has probably already been done. And publishers have sort of decided what is good and what is bad. And they have reasons for why they do that. Everything from how people look at the screen to how many people are right-handed. All this factors into kind of preferred ways of laying things out. So it turns out everybody built the same boxes. And so what we decided to do is simplify everything. Instead of having to say, well, this is a box and this is my meaning of my box, we use what is called semantic HTML. That means we use words that have meaning so that we can describe things and they mean the thing that they are. So instead of having a box that we say a banner goes here, we say this is our header. We know it's a header because it does header-like things. We say this is the main content of our page. We know it's main because it has the main area. We started really simplifying things by using English words to describe the pieces of the page. And that's where we are now. The hope is that there'll never be an HTML6 because we've made the language extensible, meaning we can grow it. It is semantic, meaning the words are obvious what they're supposed to be. And it can just grow here and add new pieces without needing to change the rest of it. Now, working in HTML, there's a couple different tools, just like working in all different source code. You can use a basic editor like Notepad or or TextEdit and just edit plain text. That's fine. It works. All HTML uses encoding in plain text. We just use symbols to say this is a tag, this is our text, and it's fine to just type it up. But HTML editors like Notepad++, Eclipse, or Visual Studio Code will give you some advantages like they will interpret your syntax as you go along and highlight it and show you what's right and what's wrong. Well, not necessarily wrong. It'll show you whether it is what they expect or not. And so that's a very handy thing to do. You will be writing, especially in future classes, a lot of code in enhanced text editors. However, there are other tools out there. They're what we call IDEs and WYSIWYG editors. IDEs is an integrated development environment. That means it has not just a text editor, but also something that can compile and syntax check your code, and also something that can run your code and let you debug it. For HTML, there are things like Dreamweaver, NetBeans IDE, Komodo IDE. Visual Studio Code is a text editor. Visual Studio is an IDE that includes Visual Studio Code, compilers, and other things in it. You will be working with many different IDEs over the course of a programming certificate. A lot of the other programs will do just fine with enhanced text editors. So now let's look what an HTML document actually looks like. As you can see, it's readable text, but not all the words mean anything. In particular, you can pick out that there are these colorful elements that define part of the content. Our book kind of just shows us through. This is a two-sided element. These are empty elements which only have one side. This is what an attribute looks like. And this is what it looks like when you put elements inside of other elements. Taking a look real quick at our book, sometimes I know with this particular book especially, and some of the other books, it's a little confusing to tell what it is you're supposed to read and what it is you're supposed to do. Notice that I said you are supposed to read in our HTML document HTML7 through HTML13. That's actually what the page numbers look like in this book. So we have HTML7. Right here is this Exploring an HTML Document section, and it walks you through each piece that I'm about to walk through before we finally get down to this Creating an HTML File, HTML13, and this has the instructions that I'm going to follow in this video, but also the instructions you need to follow for your homework. Switch us back over to the presentation. So, the very first line in an HTML file is what we call the document type declaration, or the doc type. Every single HTML file needs to have this first. This is what tells the browser how to interpret the rest of your page. This used to be a long address that led to a document that said, this is what my symbols are. This is what is correct HTML for me. But in HTML5, we've standardized all that. So we just say the doc type is HTML, and that means HTML5. Then we can add our element tags. This is what an element tag looks like. Everything in our page gets wrapped in some sort of an element tag. An element tag starts with a less than, has the name of the element, and then it goes to a greater than. If it's a single-sided tag, which there aren't that many of, things like line breaks and images are the main examples that we'll use of that, then that's all you need. Otherwise, this is considered an opening tag or a starting tag. This opening tag goes until you see the slash with the same element name, and that is the end of the element. So when you see something like this that says element content element, this content is inside a box that you're drawing on the screen named element. It's important to think of element tags as being essentially boxes that you're drawing on the screen. These are physical things that have real properties that we can define, change, modify, and use to draw our page. Just like a real physical box, you cannot open an element without closing it. You need to have all the sides of your box. The only difference is, like I said, those single-sided tags, of which there's very few. Likewise, if you try and put something in the box, it needs to be all the way in the box. You can't open an element, open another element, then close the first and close the second. They need to be nested, meaning I open my big one, I open my small one. I close my small one, I close my big one. Order matters, and it will mess you up. That's one of the major mistakes that you'll see. The other major mistakes you might make typing up code is forgetting this little slash. Because remember, if you don't put the slash here, you've opened element one and then opened another element instead of closing the first one. And missing the closing of an element is not that uncommon. People remember to put the first one, but forget to put the second one. So if we had a paragraph, this is just what it would look like. We open our paragraph, we have some text content in our paragraph, we close our paragraph. Shows us if it's not an open and close, we call it an empty element, like images or instructions to the compiler or instructions to the browser can be empty elements. And then we just use this one-sided tag. Our HTML document itself is divided up into two main sections. We have a head section and we have a body section. Almost the only thing that I personally think is confusing about HTML is you'll have heads, headers, and headings, and you need to keep them separate. The head section is labeled head. It has a head element that opens it, and it goes to the close head, and then the body is under the head. Just like any other document you've ever seen. But in this case, the head element is giving information to the browser about how the page should be treated. The information in the head element is not really seen by the user. The effects of it are seen. Everything that the user should see is in the body element. So this is what our basic document looks like. This is our generic HTML document. We will be using this, and you will use this over and over and over and over and over and over again. It starts with doctype HTML. There's an HTML tag that says everything on this page is HTML, and it closes at the bottom of the file. There's a head tag that has head content. We close our head tag, open our body, there's body content, and we close our body. If we need attributes, these are properties of elements. So all elements have some default properties that are hidden from the user, and if you want to change them, you just put them in the tag with this name value pair type setup. Attribute 1, ATR1 is equal to value 1. ATR2 is equal to value 2. Maybe that is a style attribute if you want to set the style of an element. Maybe it's whether or not that element is hidden. These are properties of an element, and you just assign them in the tag. Sometimes, if you don't need a value, if it's just true or false, like hidden, you just need the name. And you say, okay, well, if I'm setting hidden, then I'm setting that to true. And so I say hidden is true, basically. So that hides this paragraph. The other thing to remember about HTML while we're getting started with it is that HTML basically ignores white space. If you hit enter, if you hit a bunch of space bars, if you hit tab a bunch of times, HTML doesn't care. It just throws a block of text up on the page. That means we can use white space like tabs and enters and multiple lines of text to make code much more readable for us without having to worry about how it displays on the screen. If you want to go down to the next line, you need to use a BR tag, which stands for break. If you want to hyphenate a word, you can use a WBR tag for word break. And then it'll divide that word if it's word wrapping. So you can use white space and space things out to make things easier to read. The common way that we do that is when we nest HTML, we tab it over or space it over one more time so we can easily see what is inside of what. So, kind of obvious, when you want to view our HTML, you need to open it up in a browser. The browser interprets what that structure looks like, but the appearance is going to be determined by the style and the style sheets that are attached to our HTML files. Okay, creating an HTML file. If you look, you see that these are basically the same instructions that are right here. Creating an HTML file. So here's what we're going to do. This is the basics of our assignment and our homework for lesson 14. What we're going to do is open up our Visual Studio Code editor. We're going to create a new file, new file, and we're going to name it something like hello and my last name. .html. We want to tell it it is an HTML file, .html. And then it's going to immediately ask me, where do I want to save it? And so I'm going to save it someplace useful, like my OneDrive, CTI-110 examples. And now I've got a blank file. The very first thing that I want to do is put that doc type in, following the instructions from that chapter. Doc type, and notice with Visual Studio Code, because it's an HTML enhanced editor, it pops up a suggestion with the very first less than that I put in. And I say, okay, this is a doc type. And yes, that is the thing that I want, a doc type, HTML. Then I want to say the rest of my code is HTML. Yours is probably going to default to inserting the close HTML. The more you type HTML, the more annoying that gets. So I tend to turn that feature off. It's in preferences. I can help you find it if you need help. But while you're just beginning, sometimes that assistance is kind of helpful. So then I want a head in my close head, and I want a body. My basic HTML document. And I'm going to set an attribute on HTML, and I'm going to say the language of my HTML is English. So now it knows how to interpret letters and things that I type up. If I type special symbols, it'll know which ones to use. And that is our document. We have our head section, we have our body section. We have absolutely nothing on our page. So if we go to, let's move this, if we go to our homework assignment, we see that this deliver hello world says to follow those instructions to create a blank page, and then insert a line between body and the closed body that has the following in it. Hello world, I'm you. So let's do that. We come here and we say, hello world, I'm Ryan Steffes. But that's not quite what we were supposed to do. We want that to be a headline. We want that to be big, beautiful, and bold. So I wrap it in an H1. Then I can save my file. I hit Control S, File, Save. I right click on the name of my file and I say, show me this in File Explorer. And it pops up that file. I can then right click that and say, open this with Chrome. And you see, I've got hello world, I'm Ryan Steffes. Ta-da! Now I could save that and turn it in, but I want to show you a few things about how Chrome works that you may not have ever played with before. For one thing, you can right click and view source. And you see this is the exact code that I typed into the editor. So anytime you want to see how a website works, right click, view source. The other thing that I can do is hit Control Shift I. And that pops up a debugging window over here on the side. And you can see with the Elements tab selected, I can see the pieces of my website and highlight them. If I say HTML, it highlights the entire website. There's nothing in the head. If I highlight the body, it shows me that this is the entire body of my document. And this is my text. You can do this for any website. And because you can do this for any website, I'm going to show you that I can edit this text. And that's why you can't trust screenshots of websites. Because once it's on Chrome, Chrome is interpreting anything that gets sent to it. So it has the power to change anything that got sent to it. You can never trust web content that has been to the user when it comes back, because they have total control over what they get shown and what they send back to you. So if someone is showing you a bank statement on their website and they say, look, I've got a screenshot. It shows my balance. My balance is $1 bajillion. That doesn't mean anything. Be careful of what you see. Be careful of screenshots. It's just a fun way of showing you how the debug and how we will edit and test and practice with our Chrome window. So go back to our actual code. This is that assignment. This is our Hello World assignment. You can save it with your name and turn it in. But before I do that, let's go back and remember one more thing that I haven't quite gotten to yet. So I guess we can come back to it in a second, but I'm going to show you. If you want to make a comment in your document, you use less than, exclamation point, dash dash, and see how it automatically adds the end of my comment. I can put that end of my comment anywhere I want to. And notice that everything I put here is green. That means this is all a comment text. None of it will show up to the user. So what I'm going to do is put my name, my class, put your section number here, and then I'm going to put deliver for Hello World. And that's just good practice for how you'll document your code in the professional world. You'll almost never write new files without having some kind of a header that either describes the file, says who wrote it, gives you information about the content of the file. It's just good practice to get into documenting your code as you go. Another good practice to use comments for is if I'm building a new file, I'll often start like this. To do, insert headline here. And I'll go down my assignment and read all the things that I'm supposed to do and say, okay, to do this here. To do this here. Put a table here, put a graphic here. That way I can hit Control F later, find to do, and know whether I've done all the assignment. I can start off by just roughing things out, saying what I need to change, and then searching for to-dos later. Get rid of that comment, and then when you're done, you delete the comment, and you know you've accomplished that part of the task. Control S and save, and then I could submit this on Blackboard. Blackboard, our assignment wants us to take a screenshot to prove that we actually at least opened it up and looked at it in Visual Studio Code. Take a screenshot of this, turn this in with this file, and that's about a third of your homework already for this week. let's jump back to some properties of HTML. So this is our generic file that we just created. The head itself contains metadata. That's information for the browser, that's information for search engines, that's information about the document. It tells us what we should do with that information. It can have a bunch of stuff in it. We will cover a lot of these things later. Like I said, we are right now kind of glossing over a lot of this material to show you all the things that can be done. Please do read your book. It will make the rest of your semester easier because instead of being introduced to things all the time, you'll be reminded of them. But I know there's a lot of content in here. We can have, in the head element, we can have a base element which tells us where the document is. We can have a link element which tells us these are other files that are related to my document. The meta tag gives us information. The script tag is where we would put JavaScript or other coding script. The style tag is where we can put CSS in the head and say, okay, here's how you display this page. And the document really should have a title. That's what goes up in the title bar. So if we set the page title, we can just say title and then have some text. So if I come back over to our example, in our head, we could say title, my first web page. Save it, pull it back up in Chrome, reload it, and we now have my first web page up here in the tab. That's our title. And now notice we have something in our head. Going to kind of gloss over metadating. Basically, one of the main meta attributes, they're largely for Google. You use meta to say, these are the keywords for my document. This is the description of my document I want you to display if someone searches for my web page. Things like that. We'll come back to them. We already talked about comments real quick. It's descriptive text. It's just good because remember, you're not just communicating with other people like I showed you with those to-dos. You can communicate with the future version of yourself and make sure you've thought of everything you need to thought of. And then we'll write the page body. We'll use what we call structural or sectioning elements. We use elements that's main purpose is to draw boxes on our screen, and then we'll use CSS to move and design those boxes. So you might have an address or an article or an aside, a footer, a header. The important thing to remember is that most of these are words where you can kind of picture what they're supposed to be. Nothing enforces how you use them. This is all for good practice. You want to say this article is something that might be considered like an article in a newspaper, where if you just looked at the article, that content all makes sense together. Even outside of my webpage, that content would make sense together. Whereas an aside is set for sidebars, menus on the side, a lot of advertising is in asides. It's content that's sort of related to the article, but not directly. And then a header is the thing that has header type stuff. A footer is the thing that has footer type stuff. And these H1 through H6 is our headings. And those are older, that's why they have the single digit name. But heading 1 is as big as it gets. Heading 6 is as small as it gets, and you can outline your page using different size headers. And then you can define sections of your web page. It's kind of like a div, but with a section, you're saying all this content is sort of related to each other. When you have a section, you really should have a section header. It's not enforced, but the validators will complain about it. So this is kind of what it looks like. Old school on the bottom here, we used to have div ID header, div ID nav, div ID section, div ID sidebar or aside, div ID footer. And now we're using in HTML5 named sections. This is a header, this is a footer, this is an aside. You can see we can just lay out the same content, but we're adding some meaning to what we're doing with HTML5. Lists are an interesting concept. They make a lot of sense once you get used to them, but you can basically label something as a bulleted or numbered list. Ordered lists have numbers or letters, say A, B, C, D, E. Unordered lists obviously are bullet points, some kind of marking. You can also have definition lists and other kinds of lists, but these unordered and ordered lists are the main ones you're going to be working with and seeing. You define a whole thing as a list and then wrap each piece of the list with LI, a list item, which means or unordered list list item. The first thing in my list is teacher. The second thing in my list is course designer. And the third thing in my list is software developer. If I save that, reload it, I get this nice bulleted list here. Oddly enough, lists are way more way more useful than just putting bullets on the screen. There's a lot of different things that we can do with these bulleted lists or unbulleted lists, and we can turn the bullets off just to help our browser know that data is related. A lot of menus are unordered lists because these are a list of links that you should go down, and calling each thing a list gives a hint to our browser we should jump down and jump down and jump down and follow them through in order. So we use lists a lot. We also use links a lot. So old we just call it A for anchor, and we say href, HTML reference, href equals, and then the address of where you go when you click on this link. We're going to talk a lot about them in the navigation section of the course. So this is just like I said, an overview of the things that are possible. So if, for example, you want to turn an image into a clickable link, all you need to do is take that image tag and wrap it in an A tag. So this A opens here, then the image is here, and then the A closes here. And now if you click that image, you'll go to ctstart.html. And the last concept I really want to hit hard that is super important is this idea of pathing and file pathing. An absolute path is a path that includes everything you need to know to find the file. An absolute path on a website, an address, is going to have the protocol, HTTP, the server, www, the domain, .google.com, and then it's going to have a slash. And that slash represents anywhere on the place on our system where our server knows to look for its HTML files. And then folders can be placed after the slash or file names. Similarly, if we look at my example Chrome, you see that my file is a file, and it's at d:\data, and it gives you all the folders you need to look in before you finally get to hello Steffes over here at the end, the file name. That's an absolute path. It contains all the information. If I want to refer to another file in my HTML folder and it's in the same folder, I can use what's called a relative path. So if in my code I want to put a link, so when I click on teacher, I want to go to a different file called teaching experience, for example. And then I close my link on the other side. So if you click on the word teacher, I want you to go to this teaching experience.html. Because I don't have any path name here, that's going to look for a file in this examples folder because it knows where HTML stepis is. It just looks for a file in the same folder as that. If it is up a folder, I could say dot dot slash, and it'll say this dot dot means go up one. So we start in examples, we go up one, and it'll look for teaching experience in CTI-110. That is a relative path. Oops, wrong one. If you have trouble with the difference between absolute paths and relative paths, please reach out to me, reach out to the ITC. Go back, there's a lecture on file pathing, or a chapter on file pathing in file systems in lesson 0. Please make sure you get the difference between a relative path or an absolute path. Google it if you need to. But ask questions, because that's a very important concept as we go. So because of that, we can actually define our base path in the head. We can say the base and then give it an address. So we say, when I refer to files, I'm always saying they're in this particular document, or in this particular folder. So it'll just always go to that folder and then move up or down based on your relative path. And that's it. I know there's a lot of information today, but it's a big overview of everything that you can do with HTML. What I need for you to do is deliver this hello world, research the term WYSIWYG and answer some questions about it. This is your attendance assignment for this week. Go back to last week and look at other people's target audiences and objectives. Look at the way that they answered some of those questions and problems, and look at how you would answer it, and ask yourself, did they identify their target audience? Do you think that their content will meet their objective? So do they have a specific person in mind? Do they have the right content for that type of person? And do they know what they want that person to do that will indicate to them that their website is successful? If they're building a personal business website, they want somebody to come, learn the information, but then interact with them in some way. They need an ability to put on an appointment, an ability to send an email or make a request. They want to have someone contact with them. Otherwise, how do they know that they're successful? So look at them and think it through and say, okay, do you think they're successful? Do you have any suggestions? What types of content would you suggest based on their target audience? And just respond to at least a couple students. And then finally, we're going to start generating some content. So if we know the pages that are supposed to be in our website, we know our target audience, we want to start typing up and doing some creative writing. But you need to tell me, what page is this supposed to be on? And then give me some paragraphs that can go on that page. They don't have to be super long, but they should have some thought put into them. So if you write if you say, this is for my About Me page, and it talks about your personal resume, that's not the right kind of content for an About Me page. That belongs on a resume page or an experience page. About Me should talk about your philosophy, what you think of life, what kind of a person you are, what are you interested in. Match your content to the page that it should be on, and then submit the content on Blackboard.